I was invited to sing at the funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man. There's about a couple thousand people showed up, and I was getting ready side stage to I was putting on my guitar and getting ready to sing the last song, and I heard the minister ask the crowd a question, just to wrap up, and he said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And oddly, at that point, I started playing the song and I could barely choke out the lyrics to the last song because all I could think was, man, if this was my funeral, no one would be saying he inspired me to have an amazing marriage. Nobody would be saying he inspired me to get into better shape or to, be a better dad. They would probably say he struggled, life was hard, and then it was over.
Right.
And that's the thing. That's what people do. They tell stories at funerals, and because that's all they have left. And so that day when I left, I was determined that I would rewrite my story for not just for me but my family.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion. My words got power, my thoughts have action. Motivation, stay gracious. That's greatness. Be audacious. Motivation. Be audacious. Innovation. Be audacious. Inspiration. Be bold. Motivation. Be audacious.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where we challenge you to live your best audacious life ever. And as always, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for choosing to spend time out of your day with me. Your time matters and your growth matters even more. Now, here's today's analogy. Now, life is like a shoreline. Some fight the waves, some fear them, but the most audacious learn how to move with them, defining success on their own terms, staying emotionally present, and shaping a legacy that echoes beyond them. Today's guest is Mitchell Osmond. He's the founder of Dad Nation, a movement dedicated to helping men reclaim emotional connection, restore relationships, and become intentional partners and fathers. His mission is clear: to help men live lives worthy of imitation by showing up powerfully at home, not just at work. His journey from personal struggle to purpose-driven leadership makes him a powerful voice for this conversation on emotional availability, legacy, and redefining success. So now that you're all set, let's get into it and check out our conversation with Mitchell Osmond. Enjoy. Hey, Mitchell, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you for taking the time to be here, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Audley. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation, my friend.
Yeah, no, me too. I've always take pleasure in being able to sit down with individuals and when they share their stories or their insights that others can listen. I mean, it's really cool, the idea of here, Mitchell, you and I are going to be talking, and others have the opportunity to eavesdrop and potentially take what they heard, and if they can use that to make their lives or get themselves to a better place or increase their trajectory in some way, I mean, that's just a cool thing to be a part of. And so I thank you for helping me sort of fulfill my mission here. On this podcast, we spend much time encouraging individuals to live that best audacious life. And we oftentimes use this analogy of a pathway, right? It's like everyone's on their own individual path, and on your path has got its own obstacles, its own challenges, its own set of struggles, and the key is being able to outlast that adversity, if you will, and get to the other side. Because on the other side is where the greatness lies, and it's kind of like you get to the other side, it was all worth it. Although in the moment, if you said, hey, you go through these challenges, but it'll be better on the other side, you're not going, okay, you're not necessarily jumping at it, but when you get to the other side, you're going, you know what? I'm glad I'm here. And so it's really just that encouragement around moving past that. You much like lots of others has your own story of adversity, but also a story of transformation. And so maybe we'll use this as an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to our audience, talk a little bit about the work that you do and what's gotten you to the point that you're at now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Audley, for even asking. I think, I end up sharing the transformation journey often because it seems to resonate with people. And I think mostly because I'm not the guy who's going to say I'm perfect and I have it all together. In fact, the reason why I'm here today is because so much of my life was broken, over different periods. But I'll share a couple of my transformation moments, if you will. I think because everyone wants to know what that turning point was,
Sure. Oh
So
yeah. Like that pivotal moment, right? What was it? Yeah.
yeah. For me, there were 2 points. The first one was a fight, and the second one was a funeral. Okay, so the first one being the fight. Now, if your listeners want to imagine, I was in the living room with my wife, and we were married for about 3 years, and it was a hard 3 years of struggling, man. And we had a fight this day, and I think it was about money, and that morphed into something else, and it kind of sort of spiraled as if anyone's here is listening who's married, what I'm talking about. But this fight was different. you know um for the first time, we had used the word divorce, which we had always said we would never use. And I wrestled through we wrestled through the first 3 years of marriage. But I thought I could figure it out for the most part, but this fight, this day, was different. And for the first time in my life, I thought, I don't think that I can fix this. Okay. Deep down, I knew that if something didn't change, this was going to be over. And so, to give you some context, I was recently let go of a senior leadership position. My career was everything to me, as it is for especially most men.
Yeah.
Our calling, our identity. I spiraled into depression. I gained 50 pounds. We were about 100 grand in debt. I was medicating with alcohol and drugs to sort of cope, and was getting dangerously close to divorce. I was stressed out. I was checked out. I was burned out. And I was always asking that question of, like, why does business make so much sense? Why does leadership make so much sense? And I would be powerful at work, but I'd be powerless when I came home, and I could not figure it out. And maybe your listeners have been there. And to take a step back even further, I came from a dysfunctional upbringing. I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcohol, crime, drugs were in my family, growing up. And so I knew where I came from, and I knew that I didn't want that. I knew that I was going to be destined to change something for my family, to end this generational cycle. But I didn't know how, and I could feel myself getting pulled back into the
Mhm.
same problems, the same challenges, the same trauma. And when I would yell, I would hear, my father's voice. And it was so strange. It felt like I was two different people trapped in the same body, oddly. Like I could lead board meetings and teams, but when I came home, I didn't know how to talk to my own wife, and it kind of tore me apart. And so, a week later,
And you recognize that, like, there was two different yous going
yeah,
on. Yeah.
there was this sort of duality.
Yeah.
And I remember me and my wife would fight about this all the time, because she would say, well, how are you such a good listener and such a good leader at work, but you come home and, like, so it was a really challenging time. So, that was our rock bottom moment, if you will. And then the second point, the funeral, happened about a week later. I was invited to sing at the funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man. There's about a couple thousand people showed up, and I was getting ready side stage I was putting on my guitar and getting ready to sing the last song. And I heard the minister ask the crowd a question, just to wrap up. And he said, are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left? And oddly, at that point, I started playing the song, and I could barely choke out the lyrics to the last song, because all I could think was, man, if this was my funeral, no one would be saying he inspired me to have an amazing marriage. Nobody would be saying he inspired me to get into better shape, or to, be a better dad. They would probably say he struggled, life was hard, and then it was over.
Right.
And that's the thing. That's what people do. They tell stories at funerals, and because that's all they have left. And so that day when I left, I was determined that I would rewrite my story, for not just for me, but my family. And so, because you see, at that time, my story up to that point, the first story, or the first chapter, was my childhood, which was, it was sad. The second chapter of my story was my marriage, and that was a struggle. And right then, I decided that I would need to die to the man that I was in order to become the man I knew I needed to be. And I realized that if I wanted different results, I needed to learn how to make different decisions, right? It's the
Mhm.
old Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing, but
Yep.
expecting different results. And so what I
Yep.
did was I surrounded myself with men who were leaving where I wanted to go, oddly, like men who, like, my ceiling was their floor, and these men showed me how to take these steps to restore my marriage, to get out of debt, to, build a business, all those different things. And so within a year and a half, about 18 months, we had paid off the 100 grand of debt. We had completely restored our marriage, lost 60 pounds, built a lean, strong body, and I was clean of substances and distractions, and I was
Beautiful.
focused,
Wow.
And so essentially after that, because I was in positions of leadership and always in the public, people would ask questions like, Mitchell, what's going on, man? You're on fire. Like, what are you doing? And so I started helping buddies of mine, get out of debt or get closer with their wives, or, you name it. And one of my mentors challenged me. He said, if you really want to have an impact, to live a life worthy of imitation, you should start a podcast, man, and start sharing your story with the world. So I launched the Dad Nation podcast. Within 6 months, I had listeners around North America, and then they started asking me questions like, hey, could you help? Could you coach me? Could you, fill in the blank? And so I started helping, other men just like me who are career driven, who want to reclaim their home and their health and their happiness. They want to show up as powerfully at home as they do at work. And so I've dedicated my life to helping men restore those things and to see success, just as much success professionally as they've seen, just as much success personally as they've seen professionally, man. So that's kind of my story and how I got into it, man.
I love it. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that. It's a powerful story, and transformation all over the place. No doubt about that, right? Like it's awesome to see. And what's really interesting is, as you know, there were a bunch of things happening for you. I mean, your debt, your marriage situation, your the substance abuse, weight. You have all these things, and it's like you knocked them all off like at the same time, which is, I think, is remarkable. It truly is. I mean, for a lot of people, it's they'll kind of do that one thing at a time, right? Like, okay, let me get this. Okay, now on to the next one. And to hear that you said, yeah, in 18 months, let's take care of all of them and get them all off the table is fantastic. And so I'm curious then, because undoubtedly you had periods or moments where you maybe you took a step forward and took a step back, and and that's kind of part of the process, I would think. And you can tell me, I'm speculating totally because you didn't say that, but I'm going on the limb and guessing. How do you keep moving, especially when you're juggling all these balls at the air at the same time?
That's such a good question. And I think the big thing about what allowed that to happen, all that simultaneously, is a couple different things. Number one, I reached out to other men, right? So,
Okay.
it's as men, we're lone wolves, right? But the thing is the lone wolf dies alone. The strong wolf builds packs. And so you need people around you that are going to not just encourage you, but hold you accountable to the
Mm,
things that you said you wanted. Men who won't let you fall. James Clear, from his book, The Atomic Habits, he says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so, yeah, do we fall? For sure, in that process, but we build systems so that when we fall, it's a little trip. We get back up and we keep going, right? So the first thing that was really huge for me was, getting around a community of men who could, like, really hold me high when I lost my focus or lost my passion or my momentum, really, for lack of a better phrase.
right.
The second thing I would say is, we rely on our willpower a lot for these things. And something I talk about often is the power of why power over willpower, right? So understanding that your willpower is finite, it will run out, it's very fickle. Your will is a lot stronger at 8 a.m. than it is 8 p.m. And so you have to understand that when you connect with your why, that's so much more significant than your will, because that'll run out. So, for example, if I said to, if someone would have asked me, why do you want to lose the weight? I could say, I want to get a six pack, or I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever. And yeah, that's great. But something that connects with my why, well, that's, as a husband, as a father, if I said something like, I want to walk my daughter down the aisle one day, I don't want to have a heart attack. I don't want to die of a heart disease. I want to be able to throw my grandkids around someday, or play hockey with my son. Those things are connected, deeply connected to my sense of calling as a man. And so they're far deeper than a simple metric of 15 pounds, and so constantly being reminded of why am I doing it, not just what am I doing, and how
Mm,
does it align with the deepest desires that I have, right? And the third thing I would say is very critical for men to understand is we think so much in the present, right? What
okay.
we want to do right now. We live our lives by what we feel is good to do right now. But it's really, really important to think about the end. So for example, Stephen Covey in the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill, one of the greatest thought leaders of our time, used to always talk about begin with the end in mind. My funeral story moment where the minister said, are you living a life worthy of imitation? That was my moment of literally thinking about the end
Mm,
before I began. And so what I do with my clients, for example, is I'll walk them through a eulogy exercise, and I'll actually get them to write, like, today, if I died, what would my wife say about me? What would she write in the eulogy? And I get them to write that. And then I get them to write a version 2.0. If you were to get everything that become the man that you wanted to be, what would she write about that man? You understand what I mean? And so then you got this direct contrast of the man that you are today and the man that you desire to be. And beginning with the end, right, is critical because that really
mm,
tunes you in. Because I guarantee you that of all of my clients and some of very, very successful people, not one of them have written things in their eulogy like, I built big businesses, I made millions of dollars. It's never about that. It was, he showed up for his kids, he loved his wife. So having that moment of being faced with your mortality is very powerful and very visceral. And then they read that to their family, to their wives or their children. They'll read it to me. I mean, tears, very common, because you're just like, you can't escape reality, and
sure.
it's honesty. And so that's some things that I would say are really, really important. And that's
Hmm.
what allowed me to stay super focused
Yep.
on what I wanted to accomplish.
Yep. Yep. I think all points you made are bang on, but the last certainly is extremely impactful with respects to difference it can make frame of thinking and think again, with the end in mind, so to speak. Um, I was going to say I lost the train of thought here. No, but I think it really because what it really does, it allows you, and again, that sort of two tone exercise, right? Who you are and who you want to be, and why I like that is I think people know their shortfalls. We know their gaps are. Like if we're being truly honest, we truly do know, and it's not until that mirror is held up where you said no, look at this, what are you gonna do about it? Are you happy with it? Right? It's still until sort of drastic things take place, people kind of will coast, right? Until they're forced to. And that's what that exercise really does. And it's really interesting because I have there's a couple of school of thoughts because at the same time, as much as thinking ahead is important, there's also power and presence too, right? So it's
Yes.
that's there's that balance between, particularly as a father and you're raising children, like being present for the here and now is what matters because when they grow up and go out into the world and they think of their childhood, they're thinking about the here and now. They're not a child isn't saying, "Oh, my father was planning for a future and that's why he was." It's like, "Yeah, he took me to the park. He taught me how to ride a bike. We went to the fair." Like that's what they think about. And so not that it's not that I don't I disagree with you because I do agree with the power in thinking forward, but we also have to be mindful. So you almost have to have your foot in like two different sandboxes at the same time, so to speak. Can that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Or you could make that being present as part of your future vision as well, right? So, for example, a question that I'll often use as a basis to help men begin with the end in mind
Hmm.
is one question I'll ask. So say, for example, I was working with you, Oddly. We just use a 3-year goal, for example, because I find that 10 years can be too far away. Even 5 years can be a bit
Yeah.
much. So I'd say to you, so Oddly, I want you to picture that you and I run into each other one day in the airport. And I say, man, Audley, how you doing, man? I haven't seen you in 3 years since we recorded that podcast episode together. And if you answered me, you said, Mitch, these past 3 years have been the best 3 years of my life. Let me tell you about it.
Right.
The question would be, what would have to be true about the last 3 years of your life to make them the best 3 years? So then what we do is we start thinking about that and getting very visceral. Like, what is my marriage like? How much money am I making? How am I showing up for my kids? Where do we live? All those different things. How do we spend our downtime as a family? And you get very, very, very specific, and you kind of create it like a movie scene, if you will. We all got that scene in our heads of like driving off into the sunset, the ideal thing. And so then what we do is then we take that really vivid picture of what we want our lives to look like from every category: financially, physically, spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And then we start reverse engineering those into strategies and steps to shape our present. And so, for example, if in 3 years from now, if you were to answer that question and you talk about being present, you say, I have daddy-daughter dates every week. I
Hmm.
show up present. My kids know that I'm there for them and I love them. Okay, great. That's awesome. So what do we need to do today? And what do we need to do in the next 6 months to set us on the trajectory to be that father in 3 years? You understand what I mean? So you can kind of factor that in. And I think it's important to factor in your present and your future in that sense, right? I think
Right.
they go hand in hand. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense because really, and what I'm hearing, you correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood you, but it's really about sort of being mindful, right? That's
Yes.
what you just be mindful about the future being part of your present, right? If
Hmm.
you will. Um, again, and I'm just really just thinking from the context of a parent or specifically a father is I think one of the many roles that fathers have, and father myself, in terms of guidance and teaching, but also to create lasting memories. Right,
Hmm.
that's part of it. Like, you want to be able, as your child grows up, becomes an adult, or becomes a parent themselves, and they say, well, when I was a child, I did X, Y, and Z with my father, or I did X, Y, and Z. We did X, Y, and Z as a family, and so that's where and I remember being very intentional about wanting to make sure that I was leaving memories that were lasting and memorable. My kids are a bit older now. My youngest is 19. I've got a 19, 21, and 30-year-old. And so when we sit down and have conversations, so much of them are about, man, I remember when you did this, and I remember, like, it's kind of cool now, right? Because I really was trying to be intentional. I really was trying to be intentional, and so to have that resonate the way it does now, and I've got this now perspective of the present time, it's just really powerful stuff for me. So that's really when I brought that up, that's where I was really speaking from, that place.
Yeah, and I love that, and I love where you're at, because now you can look back. I talk to my clients about this often, but also I was having this conversation with my wife the other day. We're sitting on the back deck, and it was a beautiful day, and our son was just playing on the deck, and I said, I just want to slow this moment down, because I know that in 50 years from now, I will trade every single dollar that I have to come back to this moment.
Mm,
It's this idea that these are the days that I'm going to want back. And when I'm 85, man, there's nothing I wouldn't give to sit back in this chair on this deck with him being 20 months old. And it's something about, again, that vision of the future, really allowing that to draw you more focused in the
yeah,
present and say, boy, I need to savor these moments. And if we could just live with um, that intentionality and focus. And that's why I love this idea about the future, because oddly, and this is something I've been teaching my clients, is I just call it the author's advantage. Because
yeah,
here's the thing: we think that our past, really kind of affects our present, and then we think about our present just sort of leading us into the future. And so, really, to lay it out is, what happens is that the lies, the mistakes we've made, the trauma from the past affects how we respond in the present. And then in the present, what happens is, because we're kind of a victim to what has happened to us,
hmm,
we just start to self-sabotage. And when we start to torpedo our relationships and doing things like not going for it when we knew we should in our future. And so we think past, present, future. But I love to flip that model on its head and actually say, no, 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 it's actually backwards. What we get to do is start with the future, get a
Mm.
very, very clear picture, then allow that to paint who we want to be in the present,
Yeah. Yep.
allow
Yep.
that to dictate how we decide, how we act. And then the last step, which is the most important, is to speak to our past and
Mm.
to pull it into alignment with where we're going and make a decision to say, no, 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 this past wasn't a setback. This is a
Yeah.
setup. I'm going to
Yeah.
use this
Yes.
for purpose, and I'm going
Yes.
to focus on it and
Yep.
allow it to propel me instead of pull me backward. And so that's how I measure my life, is future, present,
Yep.
past, right?
Yep.
And I think you can unlock so much when you think about it
Oh,
that way.
absolutely. So as we talk about the past, I oftentimes do that sort of connect the dots exercise, right? Where it's like, I had to do that to get to here. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here. So I wouldn't be where I am right now. And that's how I kind of reconcile my past. I got to tell you, when my kids were young, I was very excited about the future. Like I was very excited. So when they're crawling and wanting to walk, when they're walking and wanting to run, when they're running wanting to ride the bike, I was always big on that next stage, that next level, and not that I didn't appreciate where we were because it was cool and I loved it, but I was like, okay, so what are you gonna do next? Like that was what always me. And again, and even now, when I think about where I am, with older children now. I gotta say, I think I'm probably enjoying them now more than I ever did before. I
Mhm.
truly, truly am because we're having, adult conversations. We're reasoning. They're teaching me stuff. They're showing me the flaws in what I taught them and why it doesn't work today. Like we're having these types of dialogues, and it's just really eye opening. And so I've got such deep, deep appreciation for that. And I think what's nice about that, and this may tie in a little bit to the legacy piece I want to talk about, because this is how you create a legacy, right? This is how
Mhm.
you create a legacy for me. And being able to have these dialogues and to think about, well, what does the future look like? So again, they were crawling. I wanted to see what comes after next, and what can we build on, and where things could grow to. And so maybe if I can ask, when we talk about leaving a meaningful legacy, why is that important to you?
Hmm. Well, I would say it's important to me because I realize how important it is for my children and their children, you know, because we have significant impact and significant influence in the home, right? And so, I'm just going to write a couple things down here because oftentimes I think faster than I can speak.
You're
So,
better than me. I'm a keyboard warrior. Psh, 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 it's like that. So,
well, here, and if you're listening to this and you're a dad or your father or your man, I want to encourage to answer the question, why is it important
mhm.
to have a legacy? Well, today we know that 1 in 4 kids will grow up in the home without a father, right? So some parts of society would say that men don't matter, but I'm going to share some statistics with you that will blow your mind.
Okay.
63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes,
Mm.
right? 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And the last one,
Wow.
71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes.
Mm.
The reality here is that our kids need us, our spouses need us, our partners need us, we need each other. And so, what you do as a man, husband, and father matters. You are affecting generations. So when you say, "Why is it important to have a legacy?" I'm like, man, because you know what? My son is going to become the man that I am today. We know that there's a high likelihood that he's going to adopt my behaviors, my patterns of living, my choices. And so if I want to raise a great son, I need to be that man. I know that my daughter will grow up to crave the attention of the man that I am, right? And so the best thing I can do is to model greatness so that is if I want her to bring home a great man one day, she needs to be able to see that
What it
greatness
looks like.
when she
Yeah.
can recognize it, right? And so, yeah, it's important for me. It's even more important for my children because the
Mm.
best thing I can do is model that for them to set them up for success. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. It totally does, and it allows them to, again, it uses the example of your daughter, right? Being able to see what a loving, caring, present partner can look like because you have it in your father, right? Like, for most young girls, the first man they fall in love with is their father, right? That's their first
Exactly.
love, right? And so because of that, it's like you want to replicate that.
Hmm.
And I think those stats that you shared are just mind blowing. I think it really just speaks to the importance of the entire structure, right? And yes, we are in a society where there's tons and tons of single parent homes,
Yeah, of course.
and no one is saying that they're bad or they're good or they're better than or worse than at all. But I do believe that the natural order of things is to have both parents present in the children's lives, and so
Hmm.
um,
Like,
creating that legacy, I think, is important.
yeah, and the reason why I share those statistics is because the vast majority of the men that I work with and the men that I help are very powerful at work. They've built businesses, they've built, they're entrepreneurs, they're VPs, CEOs, you name it.
Sure.
But they come home and they feel like they don't serve a purpose, or they feel like an inconvenience, or they don't feel like they're contributing. And so what happens is they lose sense of their role, and the role that the purpose they serve, and they lose sense of their purpose and passion, and then they lose that vitality and that excitement for life because they lose sense of their mission. I talk to so many men who I say one of the first questions I ask is, what do you want?
Mhm.
90% of the men don't even have an answer for that question,
Right.
because they've spent their life building a business, or serving someone else's dream, and they've completely lost focus of what they truly want and what matters most to them. And so what I help them understand is, man, what you bring is powerful,
Right.
to your home and to the workplace, right? And I help them kind of, again, begin with the end in mind, to really kind of see, what do you want to be known for? What do you want your life to be about? And it's powerful exercises.
The sort of other aspect of this, and something that you had to work through, is your relationship with your partner. And certainly we talk about being present, not just physically but emotionally. That's a big aspect of that. The men that you've been working with, or clients that you've seen, the ability to engage with partners in that fashion from an emotional standpoint, is that something that you see as problematic? It's not there. Like, we're like, because at the same time, you said these men are powerful men. They've got their businesses. They've done all these things that are important outside of the world, but inside, and you experience this too, right? Inside, it was very, very different. What are you seeing as far as that goes, from an emotional availability standpoint?
Oddly, that's such a good question, man. And I would say 100% of the men that I've worked with have a difficult time connecting emotionally. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Let's I just real quickly, I'll talk about, actually, before I forget, I want to give your listeners a free gift
Okay.
at the end of our episode, and which I'll talk about, but it's a gift that can help them connect with their partners on an emotional level. But I want to talk about our wiring, and our history as men, and then what we can do in the present. Okay. So when we think about our past, I mean, okay, let's start with our wiring. Let's think about how we're wiring. The masculine, right? And I'm talking about the masculine essence, because everyone has, a combination of masculinity and femininity. So I'm not talking about gender. I'm just talking about, as a man, the thing that makes you, in your masculine sense, the thing that is a driver for the masculine is a sense of mission, excellence, purpose, achievements, all those things. These are very things that make us come to life. And so with women, the big drivers behind the feminine are nurturing, intuition, emotions, things like that. And so a real simple way we see this played out, and again, this is a generalization,
Mhm.
but if you were to go to a Super Bowl party, right, where do you typically see the men hanging out?
From the TV.
In front of the TV, watching the sports, right?
Right.
Watching the athletes.
Yeah.
Because again, they're drawn to this calling, this mission, that some of these athletes are the best in the world. They're
Yeah.
excellent in what they do, right?
Yeah.
Doing great things. Where do you see the women?
Probably gather around in the kitchen, around the table.
Exactly.
Right.
Probably around the island in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine,
But
connecting with.
let's be fair, Mitchell. Let's be fair. Before those guys ended up in the front of the TV, they stopped in the kitchen to grab some food, and then,
Yeah,
right?
they grab some chicken wings. But you see the women, just nurturing each other's relationships. How the
Sure.
kids, how are things going, and that is a perfect picture of the masculine operating so let's understand that we're wired totally different. Now that's not a bad thing.
Mm,
It's just we have to understand, because it's a great thing when we can learn how to use it. So our wiring totally different. Now let's talk about our history. We're just 2 or 3 generations removed from, anybody ever hear the World War? Men came home from this extreme PTSD, extreme amounts of trauma,
yep.
and
Yep.
absolutely no resources or tools to be able to deal with it. They had one tool, and that was the bottle.
Yep.
And God bless them, and we thank them for all that they did, but they didn't have many tools on how to process that trauma. And so what they did was they stuffed it down, or they drank, whatever, right, to cope. And that's, they then their sons learned a narrative: stuff it down. Real men don't cry, right? Deal with it, suck it up.
Yep.
And then those men raised children. And then here we are today, just a couple generations removed from intense trauma with not a lot of skills or tools to process our emotions. There's actually a psychological term for this, and it's called normative male alexithymia, which is a mouthful.
Mm,
But that term really explains, and the word alexithymia, when you break it down, part of it means to arrest, meaning men actually stop because they have a hard time articulating the words to
okay.
be able to speak about their emotions. And so we've got this combination of being wired completely different, about not really being interested in emotions and more being interested in facts and execution, right? We come from the generations of not really being set up for success, right? And then now in today, where we might have these tools and all those things, but when we get married and we get in relationships, we have entirely different needs, right? Because we work in corporate, we work blue collar, it really doesn't matter. Your job for the most part is to fix things,
Right.
right? You get paid to bring solutions. You get paid to fix things. And you spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day doing that. And you come home, and then you got to flip a switch, because then what happens? Your wife starts talking about, or your partner or your kids, or, you name it, start talking about a difficult day they had, and we're still in
Mhm.
fix it mode,
Right.
right? And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa! I don't need you to fix it. What are you talking about? And then all of a sudden, the man's like, well, you said you had all these problems. Let me fix it. This is what I do, right?
Right. 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 Right.
And so you have to kind of deny your wiring. And one of my mentors told me, he was like, you know what happened? You know what it feels like when your partner is talking about having a hard day and all the kids and whatever, and they don't necessarily want it to be fixed. They just want you to listen and
Heard.
empathize.
Yeah.
They said it's like sitting in front of a house and watching it just in flames, and you got a fire hose fully
Jeez.
charged, ready to go, and you're like, I could put it out. I could put it out. No, I got to keep it shut off. Okay, I'm gonna watch it burn. And that's how, like, inside we're like, ugh, right?
Yeah, you're going crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And so these are some of the reasons why we have this disconnect, because you want to show up and you want to fix, and then you get offended because you're like, well, I just want to help, because that's how we're validated as men, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
a man's two biggest needs is to feel respected and to feel competent. And if a wife is like, or if a partner is like, I don't need you to fix it, blah, 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 which I get it. She doesn't necessarily need that. We feel incompetent. And then that our needs are feeling kind of rejected. You understand what I mean? And so that causes this, like, big tension. And so to answer your question, short story long, that is what we do. We teach men how to connect to, that's part of it. Teach men how to connect to their wives or partners or children on an emotional level, and essentially kind of override their wiring. You know what I mean? Because we end up treating our families like employees. That's really
Right.
what happens, right?
Right.
And our date nights turn into board meetings just with wine, you
Yeah.
know? And so we learn how to flip that switch off and say, okay, what does it look like to show up powerfully as a loving husband or as a present father instead of
Right.
a CEO or a boss? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. It does make sense. I, as you were talking, I was really thinking about at least part at one point, I think just the roles that we naturally want to play. like
Mm-hmm.
that as males and females, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we want to dive into. I remember early on in my relationship with my partner, she used to come to my place and she'd want to do my laundry, right? I'm like, no, I can do my own laundry, I can do my laundry, but that was her way of wanting to assist or help me. She's like, well, look, your basket's overflowing. Let me do it. And I'm like, no, I can do that kind of thing. And I had to actually release and let go a little bit because it's a role that she felt comfortable playing and wanted to play, and also wanted to support me. And so there was some recognition, but it does go both ways, right? And at the same time, I want to be able to go, no, let me do this and let me fix this thing, because that's kind of what I do. So to your example with the burning house and the extinguisher ready to go, like that's what you kind of want to do. I wanted to touch on a little bit about society's expectations, because that plays a big factor into everything we're talking about here. And in some instances, it allows us to proceed, and others it pulls us back because of these expectations. Um, I guess where I guess where I struggle a little bit with it is that, yeah, society, to a certain degree, the expectations of society, so men are expected to do this, and women are expected to, but there are times when, in the context of that relationship, there's things that just make more sense for the other to do, depending on what's going on. And so that's where that kind of friction comes in, because society says you're supposed to, but it doesn't work for us. We want to do it our way, right? And so there's that piece of that sort of headbutting kind of comes into play, because you're not doing what you're supposed to as a man, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, what's important to understand there, oddly, is we have to determine what success looks like for us. Right? We
Mm.
live in a world of highlight reels and social media and
Yep.
comparison. I mean, it's so loud, it's so noisy, and so the real problem is we become, I call it the gap. I get the gap trap. Okay. So what happens is we don't know what success looks like. When I talk about in our marriage or in our relationship or in our parenting or in our career, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and other people start to define that success for us. So we look at other relationships and other fathers or other careers, or you name it. And so we get caught into this gap of comparing ourselves to some futuristic ideal or some cultural thing that is not even relevant to us, instead of thinking in the gain, which is looking backward at all that we've accomplished,
Yep.
right? So we can look forward, chase the carrot on the stick, or we can look backward and see all that we've come from. And I use the acronym AMB, always measure backward. And so instead
Mm.
of falling into the gap, right, thinking, falling in that gap trap, thinking of having a gain mindset, but then also understanding that, who it's important to know between you and your partner what is normal for us. There's no such thing as normal. Welcome to 2025, right? There's just like whatever's normal is good for you, and my therapist at one point said to me, he was like, because I was like, am I working too much? Am I this? Because I'm super driven, right? Super motivated. And he's like, well, listen, man, uh, why don't you ask your wife? And so we were talking. He's like, are you happy? She's like, yeah. And he looked at me and said, are you happy? Yeah. Are you guys happy in your marriage? Yeah, we're good. He's like, all right, well, you're good. Stop comparing yourself to other people, right? And so, yeah, there are certain roles, there are certain things that feel more natural for you to step into. And I think that's important, but it's important to have that conversation with your partner and say,
Yep.
what does this look like for us? Forget about what our in-laws are doing, or forget about what
Yep.
the neighbors are doing, right? And so I think it's so critical. And then to define those success metrics for you in your home, because I'll say this: comparison, and we say this all the time, but comparison is the ultimate robber of joy. If you want to suck every bit of joy out of your life, start comparing yourself to everybody else,
Yeah.
right? And so the moment we can stop doing that, shut out the noise, shut out the world, and say, you know what? Are you good? Am I good? What are we doing? Where are we going? Let's begin with the end in mind for
Right.
our home, and let's define success for ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's self-defined, and that's sort of that's where I've landed on within myself, because it just has to be my individualized plan for my life, for my family, for my partner and I. Yeah, comparison is a killer. It'll rob you joy and make you think that you're worthless and you've got no value because you're not doing what anyone else does. And I'm sorry, what's happening on the other side of the fence is in your yard. I'm good with my yard, and that's kind of how I see that.
Mm.
I heard there's a rumor out there you're trying to help 500,000 men transform their lives, man. That's wild. What does that look like?
Yeah, man. So through media mentorship is my two ways, right? And so I keep it real simple. Oddly, I do three things. Okay, content, courses, and coaching. And so
Okay.
whether my content is the Dad Nation podcast, and like I said, that's a top 10% globally rated podcast, and we talk about all things that struggle that man, husbands, fathers struggle with, right? You talk about finances, fitness, your relationships, parenting, it's all there. Courses, I'm about to release a course called the High Performance Husband, which is essentially everything that I teach my one-on-one clients in a digital program that you can do it as a self-guided sort of map. And then
Okay.
the coaching, of course, I have the Dad Nation Coalition, which is a group coaching model, and then I do one-to-one. And that's my mission, man. And going back to the funeral story, what's my, how do I answer that question? Are you living a life worthy of imitation? What does it look like? What do you want to be known for? You know what? When I draw my last breath, if I could
Yep.
say that I've focused my life around helping other men break generational curses and connect powerfully with their partners and to show up powerfully as fathers, and in my opinion, that's a life worthy of imitation. You know what I mean?
Totally do. Totally do. I love it. I love it. Um, I mean, Mitchell, this is, I really appreciate the insights here and what you brought forth. And, one last thing I want to ask you about, and really, so I think about this podcast and being, audacious. What does audacious living mean to you? And, how can listeners start maybe living more audaciously today from your perspective?
Mm. Yeah, I would start to answer that question is I would ask yourself what makes you come to life? You know, what are those moments when your brain, when everything comes to a singular moment of focus and you're like in a flow state? Maybe that's, for me, that's when I'm coaching, that's when I'm doing this is like peak. And the question that I love, Seth Godin asks all the time, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Right? If you were guaranteed success, because here's the thing, Audley, we live our lives filtered by fear. Well, what happens if the business fails? What happens if I go for this and everyone thinks I'm dumb? We have all kinds of limiting self-beliefs. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And take all the limits off. And to live an audacious life is to fiercely pursue that thing that makes you come to life, that brings the spark into your eyes. And the combination of thinking about that question too, like, what does it look like for you to live a life worthy of imitation? What do you want to be known for? Connect with that deep, that why power over your willpower, and really kind of focus in and fiercely pursue it, and don't get caught in the trap of comparison, and
Mhm.
don't apologize for living at 10. I spent so much of my life turning it down when I was around people, and turning it down to 5, turning it down to 6, because when I was a 10 I was too much, until a mentor of mine said, listen, 7s don't become 10s by hanging out with 6s. You want to become a 10 and something, start hanging around with 10s and stop apologizing for being the man that you are. And it was so liberating. Oddly, it just changed the way I showed up in every aspect. So that's what I would encourage your listeners with.
I love it. I love it. I love it. For listeners that wanted to connect with you directly, Mitchell, to learn more about your work or even check out your Dad Nation podcast, where would you send them?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I would say the first thing is download the free gift. It's just called the connection code. Okay. And it's 50 questions to spark the fun and bring the fire back. Okay. So we talked about emotional connection. These are tried, tested, and true. Whether it's you're going out on a date, or you put the kids down, you pour up a glass of wine, take 2 or 3 questions off the list. I promise you, it's going to blow your partner's mind. She's going to be like, who are you? I regularly get emails from, partners, wives, women being like, this guy, like, I'm obsessed with him. What did you do? But it's just the power of connecting emotionally. So the first thing I would do is just download that for free. Super simple, and I'll give you the link, and you can put it in the show notes. But it's just my website /code. But where to find me? Yeah, just go to the website, dadnationcode.com. All of my stuff is there. But you can check out the podcast as well. I mean, that's a powerful resource that's totally free. It's called the Dad Nation Podcast, and you'll see my face on the cover, my ugly mug, and you'll know where it is. And so we bring in all kinds of professionals, doctors, neuroscientists, you name it. Powerful conversations. So
nice. It. Well, look, we'll make sure to put out on the show notes as well, and encourage listeners to check you out. I gotta tell you, Mitch, I really appreciate the insights and really focused conversation. I love the way you're supporting, dads and husbands and fathers, and the distinct areas through your own personal story, right? That's so it's not like I remember the commercial, the hair club for men. I'm not just a client, I'm the president, right? Like you were there and you understood that and you lived it. And so congratulations on your own personal journey first and foremost, because that was the impetus and start of this incredible movement that you're in the midst of. And again, I just want to thank you for being a guest today here on the Audacious Living Podcast.
Thank you, Ali. I so appreciate it. And, I'll leave your listeners just with this quote that's been really resonating with me. And that is, time is the only currency we spend without knowing the remaining balance. Okay. We have no idea how much time we have left. I don't know if I've got 60 minutes or 60 years. And so it's not lost on me how precious time is. And so I just want to say thank you to your listeners to giving us 40 minutes, whatever it's been. And thank you, Ali, for having me on the show today. It's powerful. So make every moment count.
I agree with you. Awesome stuff. Mitchell, all the best, my friend. Take care.
You too.
Back we are here from the podcast, and man, that was a great chat with Mitchell. One message clearly stood out, and that's true strength is emotional presence. Mitchell reminded us that legacy isn't built through titles or money. It's built through how we show up for the people who need us the most. And that's such a key point. If I reflect on kind of what I loved most about this conversation, it had to be Mitchell's honesty. No posturing, no perfection, just real transformation. And it was a reminder that audacity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet courage to evolve, to heal, and to lead with heart. If you're looking to connect with Mitchell, you can find his work over at dadnationco.com. He's got some great free resources. He talked about the connection code, which is 50 questions designed to deepen emotional intimacy and reignite meaningful conversations. Of course, we got y'all hooked up because the link is in the show notes. Just like that shoreline, life responds to intentional movement. Define your own version of success, lead with presence, build a legacy that lasts. If today's episode resonated with you, please take a moment to like, follow, subscribe, or share this podcast if you haven't already done so, because that's how we continue to grow and inspire in audacious living worldwide. Until next time, stay bold, stay present, and live your best audacious life ever. Much love. Take care.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion. My words got power, my thoughts have action. Motivation, stay gracious, that's greatness. Be